Coming up on this week's show, was blowing into your game cartridges a waste of time?
An incredible new Tomb Raider fan game.
And we go inside Maxis and the Sim games with Justin McCormick.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, if you get a minute, have a look on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk and check out their visual compendiums, covering systems like the NES, the ZX Spectrum, the Master System, and their new book dedicated to Game Boy box art. You can check them out right now and, of course, help out the show by going to bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 263, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to the show where each week we reminisce about classic video games, find out the stories behind them, and also explore kind of what's happening in the world of retro gaming today with a healthy dose of nostalgia sprinkled on for good luck.
You know, apparently, nostalgia is a disease.
Well,
that's
I'm
what
a
the
disease.
ancient Greeks said. Yeah.
I'm a disease then, because that's why I do the show, and I'm addicted to nostalgia.
Proud to be diseased. There's a new t-shirt we could get made. But today, we are going to be finding out the story of, by far, one of the most infamous video game series of all time, going inside Maxis and getting some stories about the Sim games.
Yeah, the Sim games were huge. Like, Maxis was a wicked company and it was on so many different systems. And, you know, we're going to be talking with Justin McCormick, and Justin was there from the very start. So he worked with Will Wright, and Will Wright is, you know, the main man behind Maxis, really. And he's kind of running the Sim series at the moment. But there's tons of titles like SimCity, Sim Ant, Sim Life as well, which were absolutely fantastic. And of course, SimCity 2000, which I don't know about you guys, but when SimCity 2000 hit, I was addicted to that title.
Yeah, man, I love the Sim games. I had to jump on this one and talk to him about it as well. And it was a good laugh as well. Like, you know, he was talking about the Sims, and then we brought him back to talk about Sim Ant because we had some funny questions about the spiders with the laser eyes and stuff like that. So it was a really cool, chilled interview. And he had a really good voice as well, you know, one of those really relaxing voices. Dan said, you know, he listened back to it and edited it. You know, you could have fallen asleep to it. It was that relaxing.
Oh, beautiful bass. And I think I had to add about like 10 decibels of treble onto his voice. Proper gravelly, great voice. You're going to enjoy this one. Justin McCormick is coming up very soon on the Retro Hour podcast. I mean, he worked with Will Wright, like you said. And also, I love the fact you talked about some of the more obscure Sim games as well, like Sim Mars. I don't remember that game.
Sim Raccoon.
there was Sim everything, wasn't there? You know, like, Sim Mars he mentions, but stuff like Sim Ant as well, which was kind of a crazy game. You know, a lot of these were kind of a bit crossovers with edutainment and stuff, and like even, you know, SimCity seemed a bit like a business type of game.
Well, you do mention in this interview, and obviously you'll hear more about it with Justin very soon, but how city planners actually asked Maxis to give them advice on, you know, planning for emergencies and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and of course the disasters as well. So that was one thing I loved about the game. You know, when you get bored, you can just have earthquakes. You can have, you know, huge Godzillas attacking your cities and stuff. So there was always an element of fun in there as well.
Although that did get them into trouble, as we hear about.
I was going to say, I didn't want to give it away as a spoiler, but I did love that little story about how that got into trouble as well.
So you're going to enjoy this one. Justin McCormick, stories about Maxis and the Sims games coming up very soon on the Retro Hour podcast. And of course, we have lots of retro gaming news stories that have been making the headlines this week. Let's jump straight into it with actually a story that bizarrely first surfaced about 7 years ago. But I've actually been seeing this all over my timeline again this week. And loads of websites, including Tech Times, Gizmondo, that picked up on this and actually done articles about it in the last week. That apparently blowing onto your game cartridges didn't actually do anything. Now, I was looking at our listener stats, and we do actually have quite a healthy audience who are aged between about 18 to 24, who might not remember, you know, playing like NES and Super Nintendo games. Why did we blow on game cartridges, Joe?
So yeah, I feel like I'm telling people to suck eggs here, but like you say, we have recently had a few younger listeners, so yeah, we used to blow on cartridges, not just now, but back in the day, we used to blow on them because of about half the time, 50% of the time, you would stick it in the Mega Drive or the SNES or Nintendo or whatever, and it wouldn't work on the first time. You would just get the black screen and the game wouldn't load. So you'd pull the cartridge out, blow into the bottom of it, as if you were blowing away the dust, even though you'd only played that game the day before. And then it would magically work, and it always worked. It worked every single time, didn't it, when you did that? You know, Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo SNES, anything like that. But yeah, this article, which is coming up again, is obviously saying that it didn't actually work. It's been proven it didn't work. And what I found really interesting about this is I've seen loads of memes in the past about this saying like, oh, it even says it on the cartridge label, don't actually blow into them. You know, on the back of like SNES cartridges, it's got like
printed on the back of it.
Printed on the back, it says the instructions of it. And I was like, when you sent this article earlier, and I was like, yeah, it is printed on it. So I went into my cupboard to get some of my unboxed games out, and I looked at my Nintendo, my SNES, my N64, and my Mega Drive games, and it's not on there. It isn't actually on there saying do not blow on them. It just says don't put like alcohol on them and stuff.
There's a Mandela effect.
There is. There you go. And I thought I could have sworn it said on them don't blow on them, and I could have sworn I've seen pictures of it saying don't blow on them. But yeah, apparently, if anything, it's actually bad for them.
It's like one of those urban legends, like, shaking a Polaroid picture didn't actually have any effect on it developing.
Well, you're blowing my mind there now.
and like, I've seen this because I've seen a lot of people restoring carts and doing stuff online. And apparently, I don't know if I'm going to damage your carts telling you about this, but apparently using a rubber on the actual cart is a good way of cleaning it. Taking it out, getting the PCB, or contact cleaner, I hear is good.
You see, interesting, because it does actually say on them, don't use chemicals or alcohol on the contacts, and don't touch the contacts. But like you say, everybody always touches the contacts, tries to clean them themselves. And you can even get like little alcohol rubbing cards, to clean them with as well, which really help them. But apparently the reason it made it worse was apparently when you blew in them, you got spit particles onto the contacts, and it could actually damage them, apparently, or make them rusty.
If you
or something.
like sucking your car.
Yeah. But apparently the reason it tended to work on the second try was because after you tried it the first time and it didn't work, taking the act of putting the cartridge in and taking it out and then putting it in again, that was actually what was cleaning the cartridge or something, apparently, to make it work. I'm not 100% about that, but apparently that's why it would work after you blew on it. It wasn't the fact that you blew it was just the fact that you took it out and put it in again.
Yeah, I used to blow in everything.
Yeah, same. I still do. I still do, even though I know that. Like, I've heard all this.
My floppy drives, my mini disc player.
Got to get in there.
I don't know if you guys are the same as me, though, but I've got so many memories. Recent memories, actually, playing my Jaguar, that kind of thing, putting games in, them not working, pulling it out a bit, putting it back in, not working, trying it 5 or 6 times, then blowing it and pushing it, and it worked.
Yeah, and
that's happened loads of times.
The amount of times I've blown in it and it doesn't work, and then I get out and I blow it in, and I full on like, kind of like blowing it, get the dust out, do you know what I mean? And then it works. So, yeah, apparently it's all an urban myth, urban legend.
See, I always wondered if when you blew in it, that kind of the condensation in your breath, which, you mentioned then is actually bad for it, but if that kind of helped the connectivity somehow, because obviously moisture is, water is a conductor, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe there's something in it there, yeah.
Yeah, interesting though. What I actually found mind-blowing about this article that I'll put in our show notes on Tech Times is that there is still a support page for the NES original console and the game packs on Nintendo's website.
I thought you were going to say like a Nintendo hotline to ring still. There's like one guy working
there. Are you having problems with your carts?
There's one guy working there still. Yeah, you got to blow in it, mate. But an online article makes more sense.
It's cool that Nintendo's actually got something about the original NES and, support for it on their website today. I think that's pretty cool. But there you go. Apparently, we've been wasting our time blowing into our game cartridges for the last, 30, 40 years. Speaking of 30 years, actually, there has been a big celebration. I heard loads of people talking about this over the weekend. Lemmings turned 30. I believe it was on Sunday, the 30th anniversary of it.
Yeah, and I've actually been writing an article for Amiga Addict about Lemmings. So I've interviewed them recently, and it's an absolutely amazing title, so revolutionary when it came out, and it started with the guys basically in a youth club doing images of killing little pixels and kind of just having that idea, and then grew to I think it was over 32 systems it was ported to. It was like Lemmings was like the Doom of back in the days. It would run on every single system. And I think they're still porting it. There's a new port coming for the Spectrum next, isn't there?
I've got Lemmings on. I found it on the PlayStation 2. Didn't realise it ever came out on the PS2, but actually it's a really good version on there.
Well, I was going to say, is it a 3D version or does it look like the original?
Yeah, like the original, but with souped up graphics and music.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
I know you mentioned the 3D version because that was the changing point, wasn't it? When Lemmings kind of started to do a bit of a downhill move. But, I remember Lemmings 2, Oh No More Lemmings, Christmas Lemmings. There were some wicked titles. And also it was like a game that appealed to everyone. I remember... grandmas playing Lemmings and kids at the same time, everyone enjoying it. And also, it was really weird because, your parents would come in the room when you're playing it and they'd actually recognise some of the tunes that they used on it.
To me, we've actually done entire shows about Lemmings before. I think in our early days, I think we had Mike Daly on one of our, I want to say it was in the first 10 episodes we ever did. Talking about Lemmings, and we had Tim Wright on who did, the music for Lemmings as well. And he talks about the fact that they used a lot of those old copyright-free nursery rhymes essentially in the game, which at the time was just to get around having to license music, but actually it gave it a really unique feel, I think, didn't it?
And DMA Designs are still on top. They turned into Rockstar North, and they've been very successful. But also there was that whole set of Lemmings stamps and classic video game stamps that included a Lemmings one that came out last year.
Yeah, and I love the fact this has actually been making headlines. The Metro Evening Telegraph have been covering it as well. Showing pictures of the Lemming statues. There is actually statues in Dundee if you go there, because it is obviously an icon of British gaming. I think you're right in terms of the 3D games. They were a bit hit and miss. I tried playing 3D Lemmings on the PlayStation 1 about a year ago, and I know some people love that game, but I just couldn't get my head around it.
I only ever played the demo of Lemmings 3D, and I enjoyed Lemmings. It wasn't like I had it for the Mega Drive. I wouldn't say it was my favourite game, but it was a game I always went back to. And I remember playing the demo on PS1, and I couldn't get into it at all. I couldn't, and it kind of reminds me of like these bad 3D games, which came out before my 64. I always kind of gets labelled as one of them.
I always think Lemmings should be pixeled, and Lemmings 2 for me it's one of my favourite titles. Because they defined the Lemmings. They had different tribes for everybody, and they all had different identities.
Is Lemmings 2 the one which is it's called Lemmings the Tribes or something?
Yeah, the Tribes. Yeah. And that was really funny because they've always had good humour with it as well. Like DMA, even up to now with Rockstar North, they've still got tons of humour in the game. I don't think they've released a proper serious title for years. It's always been a laugh, hasn't it?
Because I remember when I got my Amiga 500 for Christmas, I got the Cartoon Classics pack, and that came with Bart versus the Space Mutants, Bart Simpson game. There was Captain Planet in there as well, really cheesy Saturday morning TV show. I played both of those games, all day long. And Lemmings, I loaded it up, and I hadn't really used a mouse all that much before then. I mean, we're talking like 91 I got it. And I remember loading up Lemmings and just trying to figure out what was going on, and was like, oh, this is complicated. Went back to playing Bart Simpson instead for a bit. And then about a week later, one of my friends from school came over on the afternoon, and he showed me how to play it. And after that, I was completely hooked. And even to this day, I mean, last time I went up home, my brother said, bring an Amiga up with you. And I brought my A600 up a couple of summers ago. And we sat there till about 4 a.m, got through a bottle of Jack Daniels, just playing Lemmings all night.
Stuck on the first level.
Well, I didn't want to admit it, Joe, but yeah, you might be right.
Have you done 2-player Lemmings?
Yeah, we did that as well. You play with 2 mice, and you got to kind of compete with each other. And I think even if even in 1-player mode, I think having 2 people in front of the screen helping each other problem solve, it is still a really engaging game.
Absolutely.
I remember meeting one of our friends, Alkis, came round, and we were playing Lemmings, and there's this little fan in it, and you can move the Lemmings and blow them with it. And he was like, I've not known that you could do that for 10 or 20 years. I never knew what the function of that was until you showed me. It was one of those kind of games, wasn't it? You just worked around the problems,
Yeah, still great. Still a fantastic game. Still so much fun, and still as frustrating as ever. When you make a little mistake and that's it, you're going to start the whole level again. But a legendary series. So happy 30th birthday, Lemmings. many happy returns. Hopefully we'll get some new Lemmings games at some point. That's a series that needs to come back proper, I think.
Totally. When I DJ, I drop so many Lemming sound effects into my sets now. It's just like, oh no.
Well, something else that looks really impressive now, this is a fan who was a massive fan of Tomb Raider 2, and incredibly, he's done a stunning fan-made remake of Tomb Raider 2. Now, this was jaw-dropping when I first played this video. I think you said, Joe, it looks like a AAA game.
Yeah, so this has come from a guy called Nico Base, who's been working on it for about 4 or 5 years. He started it in 2016. I was watching the video earlier on, so there's a 40-minute video uploaded onto a YouTube channel by Gabriel Oliveira, just playing the game, kind of, going through it, casually playing it. And if you just stumbled across this and didn't read into it, you would just assume it's a new Tomb Raider game coming out because it looks amazing. I think the graphics in it are absolutely superb. The sound design in it is amazing. It's only, I think, about the first 2 or 3 levels. I think maybe, or is it just the first level so far?
Yeah, there's a few different levels in there, I think,
yeah,
but it's not the complete game yet.
It's not the complete game. It looks really, really gorgeous. I think the graphics and like the lighting effects in it and stuff look absolutely amazing. I was a little bit like, I was racking my brain. I was like, who's even got the Tomb Raider IP at the moment? But it's Square, isn't it? Square Enix have it. So I was a little bit like, okay, like, at least it's not Nintendo and no cease and desists come across, come out so far. But I would definitely pick this up. I've only played the first Tomb Raider of the new kind of, there's 3 of them, isn't there, of the new ones? But Ravi, you said you didn't like it, didn't you?
Yeah, like I'm obsessed with Tomb Raider. And
yeah,
like I've played the new ones, and they are absolutely awesome, and I'm really used to them now. This looks good. Like I like the idea and the concept, but like all of the stuff in here is pretty much in the new ones. Like the shading effects of it, the caves look exactly the kind of same, and I think the rendering on Lara needs to be a bit better. But it's an honourable project, and like also I wasn't that much of a fan of Tomb Raider 2. God, I'm gonna get slated now. But like I think it's awesome. Yeah, definitely. And people who are huge fans of that game would really, really enjoy this. I just hope it doesn't get taken down because does he have the rights? That's the question.
He definitely doesn't have the rights, let's be honest.
But I think the fact that you even compared a one-man project to a game that probably had 400 or 500 people working on it proves how good quality this is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And like, I guess it's because I've seen a lot of these remakes done in the Unreal Engine that it seems very Unreal Engine-y to me. But this is one man. This is pretty insane. And like, he's got all the sections in there. He's got the butler. And
well, we haven't seen that yet. Croft Manor's not in this video.
No, but in screenshots.
There's some in the video. Okay. There's like a gallery where you can view the characters, and like like a lot of the Resident Evil games do it and stuff, where you like unlock visual compendiums, and he's got the butler in there, right? Okay, as well, and he does look good, doesn't it, Ravi?
Yeah. Well, TombRaider-docs.com to download your demo version whilst you can.
Before it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are saying, looking through the comments on the YouTube video here, and there's quite an interesting comment that's near the top. One guy says here, he thinks the most incredible part about this is that it's an old school video game using modern technology. He said it still feels like a video game. They reckon that, many big companies today, they try and go for realism and make games really epic and try to push the technology. And it's all about, making it like a movie almost. But this kind of goes a bit more back to roots and feels like a game. Without kind of trying too hard.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I know I talk about Resident Evil all the time, but a friend of mine played through Resident Evil 3 literally this week. It took him like 4 hours to complete in one evening, and he bought it for like 15 quid because it's been out a year now. And he was like, not bad for he was like, it's literally like a 4-hour movie. Like, it kept me entertained for the evening. And he literally described it as a movie. Like, that's literally what he described it as. I mean, there is a lot of gameplay to it. It's not like a press A now to kill the boss kind of thing. It is an actual, but it's so cinematic. I see where people are coming from, if that makes sense.
And they're saying here, you can make a game enjoyable and, make it fun without really feeling like you've got to live up to that expectation and overcomplicating things, he's saying.
Well, I was watching this, this gameplay footage of the Tomb Raider 2 remake here, And I was thinking as I was watching it, like I was thinking I would pay it, I'd buy this game. But I was also thinking to myself, I'd probably be really bad at this because of games like this these days hold your hands so much. Like, you need to climb over here up these rocks. Well, they're going to glow slightly white for you. Like the Last of Us games do that as well. Like, you know, I've recently played through The Last of Us 2 and stuff. Whereas Tomb Raider, the old Tomb Raider games didn't do that, and this didn't do it for you. And I was just like, that'd probably be an issue for me because I was never good at Tomb Raider.
Yeah, it's definitely more puzzle based, Tomb Raider 2.
Yeah.
Like the new ones have got like crafting sections in there and all these boring kind of things that Lara really didn't do before. Whereas you just want to be in a tomb working out a puzzle and kind of just playing it at that kind of pace with like dramatic sections in the middle of it, you know. So I think it's definitely got an appeal because that's like part of Tomb Raider that's been lost.
And the fact that so much of this has already been done, you'd think, you know, if you were Square, for example, because I mean, I was reading the other day about Nintendo being up to their old tricks again. I think they took down something like 270 fan-made games.
Jesus.
In the last month, and they've been doing copyright strikes on YouTube videos and all that again.
Who's done that? Nintendo?
Nintendo, yeah. I think it was like a whole website they took the whole thing down last month. But then you think of you as Square and you look at this, someone who's that dedicated to Tomb Raider, loves it that much. He spent like, you know, half a decade of his life working on this. I hope they'll look at it like Sega did, the team who obviously they got to do Sonic Mania in the end, Christian Whitehead and that crew. Look at this and think, well, this is incredible. Why don't we work with this guy, get this out as a proper release, and maybe do Tomb Raider 1 and 3 as well with him? You know, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be really cool, like they did with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro or something like that.
I like think Tomb Raider 1 I would go mad for.
Yeah, that would be cool. But like you say, I hate to say it, but it's an easy cash grab for them as well, especially if half the work's been done. Do you know what I mean? They don't have to invest that much into it, but we'll see, won't we?
So I really hope that happens. I mean, right now you can download what's done of the game so far for free and play it on your PC. Obviously, I'll put a link in our show notes. Fingers crossed it's still going to be there by the time you listen to the show. But yeah, incredible. I mean, it just blows my mind how good fan games are getting these days. Now, a system that's really caught your attention this week, Ravi, is the Ready Model 100. Now, we've talked about similar things to this before. Projects that kind of turn the Raspberry Pi into a badass kind of old school terminal looking PC.
Yeah, I don't know what this is attempting to be. It looks crazy. It's kind of, it looks a bit like a ghetto blaster because it's got these like sidearm carry kind of things, but then it's got these two giant aerials, and it also looks a bit like a lighting control board or something really random. It's called the Ready Model 100.
You know, to me, it looks like a bit of medical equipment.
Medical equipment, yeah. I'm going to hook this up and scan you or something like, yeah. It's designed for the Raspberry Pi, but it's also designed for any single board use computer. So you could put your FPGA Mister in here, or you could put the Clockwork boards in, any type, really. It's got a Pico ITX form factor as well, so you can have little power supplies in there, space for an SSD. It's got a little speaker in there, Ethernet wireless connectors, and it looks like a fun little kind of project. The display on it, you can have outputs going through there. So like they were saying, you know, this could be used for audio equipment. So you could hook this up, turn it into a synthesizer and have all the stuff displayed, or like a oscilloscopy style display or output. But then you could also add all your own modules internally. So it looks like a really cool device. What do you think, guys?
To me, it actually reminds me a bit of the BBC Micro in a way. Kind of the look of it, and you've got the mechanical keyboard as well, which looks beautiful. But obviously, if you picture the BBC Micro and kind of along the top of it, you know, where when you were a kid, you probably rested your glass of water. Now you've got like this very wide screen that goes all the way along, and obviously you can display things there with two stereo speakers either side of it. I love the fact it's got stereo speakers on this unit as well.
Yeah, you know, you'll be able to blast stuff, and you could retro game on it and take it around someone's house with all the additional add-ons, not have all the USB sticking out and everything. And it's £170, Great British. I don't know what that'll be with import and all of this kind of stuff. But I think that sounds like an all right price for a kind of custom case that gives you all of these options.
Yeah, I mean, some people are saying, oh, why don't you just get a laptop or something? But I mean, for that price and you get, something like a Raspberry Pi, you've got a pretty powerful little portable computer system that you can take around that looks incredible. I mean, there's actually an image in here on this article on cnxsoftware.com where a guy's actually put like a shoulder strap around it.
Yeah, like a guitar, or yeah. It's really cool little piece of kit, actually.
Do you remember that scene at the end of Revenge of the Nerds where they're on stage and he's got like the synthesizer around him? I get to imagine you playing that or something.
This awesome. Is a proper Revenge of the Nerds piece of kit, isn't it?
I'm going to get Ravi in the band and stand on stage with it.
Yeah, so I just love seeing projects like this. I mean, the more ingenuity we can see with their retro systems and making unusual things, the better. Keep them coming. Now, actually, speaking of weird things, we've noticed this weird trend that seems to be going on right now in retro portables. Now, I think this started with the Game Gear Mini that Sega brought out last year that had that 1-inch screen on there. And I remember at the time when that was announced, we were all a bit like, oh, okay, how are you going to play that then? Like with a magnifying glass or something? But now it seems to have started a bit of a trend. A lot of these mini handheld consoles are coming out with 1-inch screens.
This reminds me of do you remember like mobile phones in the early 2000s when it was like the whole joke of them becoming smaller and smaller, and there's even like a joke in Futurama where one of them answers their mobile phone and it's like literally like a centimetre big kind of thing. Obviously we went the other way with mobiles in the end, but it just seems a bit silly now. Like Ravi sent over a link for 3 different ones that should have been announced this week alone, all these different ones, but one of them, I forget the name of it. Is it the boy clone, the nano boy clone, is literally like a centimetre big, the whole console, and the screen is like only it's like half a centimetre wide or something, but it's got like a mad amount of pixels on it. Like it's smaller than a 10p coin, with a 2048 pixel OLED display, which is half an inch, 0.49 inch screen. It's just silly, man.
This is where my inappropriate joke comes in, and this would be really good for retro gaming in prison.
So I thought your joke was going to be worse there, Ravi, to be fair.
Honestly, they're cool little gifts, but they're never that cheap either.
Do you think they've had a sale on like Tamagotchis or the screens?
These mini screens.
The screens are available, yeah.
Well, I mean, this has been making a few different websites. I mean, Gizmondo have picked it up. They seem to be covering everything this week. Hackaday have got an article about it as well. This is one you mentioned. It's based on the Arduino. Very small, about the size of like a 10-pence coin. There is also a commercial product that I believe has got a crowdfunder running at the moment called the Microbyte. Now, this is more of a built kind of handheld that plays NES, Game Boy games, but again, it's got this 1-inch screen on there, 1.3 inches diagonally, apparently, runs at 240 by 240 pixels, uses a Super Nintendo gamepad layout, but you look at how small this thing is, and it's like, it is literally about the size of, half your thumb, the screen on that thing.
It's crazy. Do you think the Game Gear Micro started this whole kind of trend?
Yeah, it's got to
tiny one.
I mean, it even refers to the Game Boy Micro on the on this page as well for it. It's just, honestly, it's getting silly now. Like, I'm not saying don't get me one, like for Christmas, Dan. But they're just getting so tiny. Like, my eyes are terrible.
Well, at least if you collect them, you'll be able to fit it all on one shelf.
Yeah, there is that.
True.
That is true. I've got 15 of them all on one small shelf.
You make a good point there, though, because, people who were fans of, the original Game Boy, we're not getting any younger. Your eyes do get worse as you get older, generally.
Yeah,
so.
Why are you making it smaller?
Yeah, why are you making it difficult for us? But, it is a cool idea. And I think, like you said then, that is going to be, it's either going to be collectors who just want them to put on a shelf for a bit of novelty, or if these things end up becoming available in, Game and GameStop and that kind of places, it is going to be, like you said then, Joe, people are buying for Christmas presents, to put in your stocking as a bit of novelty. But I can't imagine people sit and playing these things.
You play it Christmas Day, and then you're like, oh, this is wicked. And then you find out they've got a USB, out on them, so you can put it on your TV and you play it for an hour, and then you think to yourself, could just be playing a normal console.
Or you drop it in your pint. And then
there's that as well.
Yeah, that is a big downside to these products, I think. But, interesting. If anyone's bought one or anyone actually, enjoys these, we'd love to hear from you. You can get us on social media any point during the week at Retro Hour UK on Twitter, Insta, our Facebook page, all linked up on our show notes at theretrohour.com. Before we get into our chat all about Maxis and working on the Sim series with Justin McCormick in just a moment, let's give a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, our dear friends at Harry's. Now, of course, it feels like forever that we've been in lockdown here in the UK, but hopefully, we're going to be looking forward to things starting to open up again in the summer, and that's going to be the case around the world. But even if you are spending a lot of time indoors at the moment, and for example, you, Joe, you spend a lot of time on like Zoom calls and that kind of thing during the day, you need to look a bit smart.
Got to look a bit smart. I look like a caveman half the time. But when Harry sponsors us, I stop looking like a caveman, because the thing is with me, I get really, really, really bad ingrown hair. So I tend to just grow my beard out because I don't like shaving. But whenever Harry sponsors us and, they send over the kits and stuff for us to use, it is amazing, because I get so scared of shaving, especially doing a clean shave. But with the Harry products, I never get any ingrown hairs. I don't get the acne from it. It's just a nice piece of kit, and it just helps with my skin massively.
Joe even put his camera on today.
I did actually.
Well, this is Harry's. They've got a really interesting story as well. This is Jeff and Andy, who are two ordinary guys who were completely fed up with overpriced razors. And they decided to start their own company to fix shaving. And the company's called Harry's. And they knew the only way they could do that was by buying their own factory. And they take less profit and offer great quality products for a fair price. And like you said, Joe, they're amazing quality blades. Not only are they really good quality, but also half the price of the leading 5-blade brand. And we want you to start shaving with Harry's today. Obviously, help out the podcast by claiming this incredible offer. Get your trial set for just £4.95, and that will be delivered to you, including a razor handle, a 5-blade cartridge, foaming shave gel, and a travel blade cover for hopefully when you can go on holiday again this summer. By nipping to this website right now, harrys.com/retro. Support the podcast. Get your trial kit by going to harrys.com/retro. Now, let's give a big thank you to our favourite people in the world, our incredible supporters on Patreon. Now, Patreon, obviously, we've had this running now for about a year, and we can't overstate the importance of Patreon to this show. Quite frankly, this show would not be going now if we didn't set up a Patreon this time last year.
The fans saved the show, to be perfectly honest. We had all these big ideas of making a studio in town because of, obviously, we had a limited time working in the studio, which is where Dan works.
Feels like I live there sometimes.
It does feel like you live there sometimes, but we used to record at 10 at night. I'd finish work at 8 and literally drive over to the studio. We'd be there till like midnight, and we'd have to do the show like 3 shows back to back, like in one evening sometimes, wouldn't we, just to get it in, because that's and literally lockdown happened, and we were just like, what are we going to do? We reached out to you guys for Patreon, and literally it saved the show. Like, we've been able to, turn our spare bedrooms into home studios, which has been absolutely amazing with top quality equipment and stuff. And it's all thanks to our listeners.
Yeah, honestly, we can't overstate just how grateful we are. And we love doing this show each week. So thank you for allowing us to continue doing the show for you each week. And of course, there are always ongoing costs with doing something like this. We have hosting and so much to pay for. And we're actually doing a bit of marketing this week as well. If you're one of our new listeners who's seen that, great to have you on board. But obviously, anything we get through Patreon goes back into the running of this podcast and allows us to do it week in, week out, and bring you these incredible guests and the retro gaming news. And of course, there are a few perks on there as well. You get our second podcast that we do just for patrons, the Retro Hour After Hours. Now, we're already planning our next episode of this, but if you want to hear the current one, it was a bit of a giggle, actually, where we actually chose games for each other to play and then kind of tried to guess each other's gaming taste, didn't we? Give them a little bit of a review.
Yeah, it was really good fun. I enjoyed the choices that you guys picked, and I'm looking forward to doing the next one. If we get the patrons to pick, then I can actually sit down and be like, right, I'm playing a game for work. This is for work.
Yeah, you can justify sitting there for 6 hours playing a video game then, can't you? At the weekend? So if you'd like to join us on our Patrons Hangout as well that we do once a month, they're always so much fun. You sometimes get this podcast a bit early, you get it ad-free. There are a load of perks on there, but really you're doing it to support the show and keep it coming each week. And of course, you will get a mention. We'll shout our eternal gratitude by giving you a big shout in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Like this week, thank you very much, Ed James,
Falco Loeffler,
Tej Panda,
Mads Christiansen,
and Martin Williams,
who all made donations into the running of the show. We really appreciate that, guys. And if you'd like to do the same, you'll find the link on our website at theretrohour.com. Right, then let's get some stories inside Maxis, working with Will Wright, working on the Sim series. You're going to love this week's guest. Justin McCormick is next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and I'm here with Justin McCormick. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm doing terrific. Thank you very much.
Well, we're very excited to have you joining us. And, you know, we always ask this question first, and that's, what was your first gaming or computer experience that you can kind of remember?
You know, certainly I was into the first stand-up, Nolan Bushnell machines like Pong and Computer Space and Tank. But, you know, my first computer game that I really was excited about was Moonlander on the Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-11. And that was a 16-bit, kind of mini computer that had a vector graphic light pen display that you could use light pen for input. And they had, crafted together this Moonlander game where you could take your lunar excursion module and try to land on the moon. And your goal was to land next to the only McDonald's on the moon. And your little astronauts would, climb out and, order a shake and fries at the drive-through and blast off. But we quickly found out that the secret game was to see how fast you could crash your lunar module into the only McDonald's on the moon. And then, you'd get this, you idiot, you've destroyed the only McDonald's on the moon. What will we do? So that was my first exposure to something that really excited me. The PDP-11, of course, was barbaric. You had to spend 15 minutes toggling in a bootstrap program into the front panel to give it enough intelligence to be able to access its own hard drive. And of course, playing Lunar Lander, it would overheat every 15 minutes and you'd have to reboot and go through that whole process again. But it still really turned me on to gaming.
And that game, I hear, was really hard as well because you had like limited fuel. So when you were landing, you had to do it all really precisely.
By the end of the afternoon, the landscape was just covered with crashed lunar modules. It was hilarious.
What was your first home computer system?
I started out with a programmable calculators. That's kind of really where I learned kind of assembly language programming. But, my first real computer was my friend Will Wright got an Apple II. And we started programming on that in BASIC. My favorite game on that probably was Sniper, and Flight Simulator, of course, was classic. I think the hardest thing about the Apple II was just how primitive the graphics were. And BASIC was a real challenge to do anything in. This was before we thought of using assembly language on that.
Well, how did you get to meet Will then and like become friends?
We grew up together. We went to high school together, and we were kind of in the nerd club, I guess you could say, in those days, and just naturally gravitated to each other. We were both heavily into cars, so we did some pro rally, off-road racing, and time, speed, distance rallies and things like that. But we just really hit it off and played a lot of strategy and tactics, magazine board games, things like Panzer Blitz and Battle of the Bulge and all those hex-based board game type of things. So we were heavily into war game type of simulation games at that time too.
So you touched on programming there. What kind of how did you get into programming? What kind of gravitated you towards that? Was it just, you enjoyed playing games, so you wanted to know how they worked?
Yeah, I think at first I thought of computers. I had a electrical engineering kind of background and science background. I thought of them as just glorified calculators. And it wasn't until the graphics really started to be available in home computers that I realized, wow, this is something a lot more interesting. My first computer that I personally owned was a Commodore 64. I immediately started, poking in instructions in BASIC and creating sprites of the Starship Enterprise and doing crude animations and things like that. And I almost immediately realized that BASIC was not my friend, that I needed to learn assembly language. So I got a 6502 manual and just started learning the basics of assembly language programming. And I think that was kind of the aha moment for me, that I said, this could be a career. This is something that I'm having so much fun, and it's so interesting and so deep that I wanted to go to college and major in computer science at that point. The C64 was amazing in terms of, it was probably the last, really the 8-bit computers in general were the last set of computers where a single developer could create everything, could write a complete game, music, graphics, everything. And you could hold comfortably in your head the entire instruction set, all the opcodes, all the timings, all the registers, without really going back to the manual after you got it down pat. So it was a very comfortable environment.
Were you aware of you mentioned simulation there? Were you aware of industrial simulators or military ones, or had you got involved with other ones that were quite accurate?
I certainly, was aware of them and watched a lot of things with, military, both space simulators and flight simulators, and was in awe of what they were doing with that technology. But I realized, wow, that's, $10 million back when $10 million meant something.
So how did you start off with Maxis? Was that straight out of college? And, what were they like at that stage? Yeah,
so... it was kind of an evolution. In 1984, Will also got a C64 and started working on a game that became Raid on Bungling Bay. So that was his first game title. He managed to get that published by Broderbund, which introduced him into kind of, the West Coast crowd. And that's where he met Jeff Braun, which they would later go on to start Maxis. And at that time, Will and I had actually, previous to that, started our own software company called Tactics Design in 1986, based on the earliest kind of thoughts of, we had both gotten Amiga 1000s at that point and had started working on what would later become SimCity. We called it Micropolis at the time, and later realized there was a hard drive manufacturer with the same name, so decided we needed to change that. But regardless, had a crude prototype, started in 1986. One of the first things that Will managed to complete was a traffic model. And, I'm looking at it and saying, well, that looks a lot like ants. Why don't we make an ant farm? And and we said, well, okay, I think the SimCity thing might sell better first, So, but at any rate, I was still in college, and I wanted to do serious programming. I did not want to do games at that point. But Will went on to form Maxis. Then in about 1991, I had gone the commercial route myself, doing several kind of productivity applications and things with video digitizers and image processing and things like that. And had kind of run the gamut. I had gotten kind of burned out on on commercial software, and started my own company to try to market a medical application of the frame grabber technology, which didn't go very far. At that point, Will said, would you like to come and work with me with games? And this time I said yes.
Yeah.
So SimCity was originally aimed at the C64, right? And that must have been before you joined, which was about 1989 that it came out.
Yeah, actually, most of the work was done on the Amiga, and they kind of backported it to the 64. So I know Wikipedia and everybody, makes it sound like the C64 came first, but that's not my memory of it. Yeah, SimCity, was their breakout title, and kind of launched them into. I remember boxing parties where we would, everybody in the company would get together and assemble SimCity boxes. That was kind of the fun thing to do on an afternoon. But we were, quickly looking at what other titles can we do in the sim genre, which led to this plethora of Sim Farm, Sim Earth, Sim Ant, and Sim Life. We even had the New York Stock Exchange approach us at one point and said, can't you make a Sim stock market game for us? And we explored that for a month or so. And the sticking point for them was that they wanted it to be realistic in terms of being able to trade recognizable stocks, but they didn't want any negative consequences. So no bad news about Exxon or something.
No stock market crash.
Yeah, yeah, you can't simulate that. Sorry,
you can't lose.
So that we parted due to I think creative differences.
So it was recently discovered that there was a version of SimCity on the Japanese NES for educational purposes. Did you have any sort of hand in that? Did you know that existed or anything?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Will, became good friends with Nintendo. The thing with NES games and Nintendo in general is the degree of playtesting and QA that they go through is just, I've never seen anything like that. They're probably do better QA than the military does before they, send out a new fighter jet or something. Because they know they can't change a game console ROM once it's out in the wild. And so they don't rush it. And so it was greatly delayed, but ultimately it was a really great port of the game.
Was it hard to convince people to kind of play this game? On paper it seemed a bit like a business style game or an educational title. How did they market it and get the message across to gamers?
It was difficult, and I think the challenge with all the Sims was that it was a different style of gameplay. It was very laid back. It was very, no consequences for screwing up. You could screw up on purpose and still have fun. So that open-endedness was a different style of play. But what we found was that it had a broader appeal than just the traditional gaming market. We had a lot of, for the first time, girls and young women and even older women that were interested in playing SimCity and just diddling around with, making their people happy. And, I remember talking to some friends, a married couple, and they would fight over who got to work on the city next, and you don't dare touch my city while I'm making dinner, that's type of thing. So it was really broad appeal that kind of changed the game scene in terms of really made that, there were some other simulation type games out there, but SimCity really kind of brought it to the forefront as a viable genre.
And that kind of theme of balance and kind of making a game fun, and I would say God Game as well. That came out of Maxis, and What were there other ideas to kind of increase the Sims franchise? Did Will have any mad ideas himself of games that were going to come out?
Not so much. I think it at that point it became just growth phase and try to it was a battlefield out there in the game industry. So a lot of it was just see how many titles you could get out on the market and see what stuck. There was a lot of failures. Sim Farm didn't do so great. Sim Earth didn't do all that hot. There was a Sim Mars that kind of, I don't know if anybody even remembers.
I didn't know there was a Sim Mars.
So just, a whole bunch of these things where we would get developers. And then, of course, we spent a lot of time porting them once you made the game. And it inevitably had to be ported 8 different ways. So you had a lot of different developers working on it. But I think the thing that we caught on to with SimCity was this vision of powers of 10, where we're going out from space and zooming in onto Earth and zooming into a city. And then that led to, the logical next step was the Sims to go right down to the house level. The first version of the Sims I started working on in 1994 on the Macintosh. And quite frankly, we just did not have the technology or the conceptual ability to make that a realistic process. We did a lot of brainstorming, and originally the concept was codenamed Dollhouse because that's kind of what it seemed like we were making. And we did some focus groups and got just overwhelmingly lukewarm response to the idea. Nobody seemed to really like it in our focus groups as an idea. But we still felt there was something compelling there if we could get little avatars walking around and interacting. The real breakthrough, finally, technology caught up. For one thing, we had enough processor and graphics power to do, good simulation at that type of granularity. But the big breakthrough was the avatar intelligence and making their ability to interact with objects open-ended. So if you plop in a refrigerator, instead of programming the Sim to, move your arm and grab the door handle and open the door and get out the plate. Instead, the refrigerator has all the intelligence. The intelligence of the refrigerator is how to puppet the Sim into doing whatever is necessary to interact with that object. And so that made it much more distributed and allowed us to do content creation kind of separate from the development of the game mechanics itself. And that really allowed third-party content creators and everybody else to jump on the bandwagon and made it the success that it is.
So you mentioned something there which actually made me chuckle a couple of minutes ago. We kind of went Sim Earth, you zoom in SimCity, you zoom in The Sims. What made you zoom in one more time to Sim Ant? Where did that come from?
Well, like I say, that was kind of foreshadowed when
you mentioned
in the earlier days when Will was working on SimCity originally and did the traffic model. We always put that back in our minds, saying, "Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Let's do an ant farm," and that game was a joy to work on because it was such a clear, clean concept. And Will and I just kind of team programmed it. I would do the UI and music and the yellow ant, which was kind of the control leader of your pack. Will was doing the pheromone overlays and the programming for the spider, which was the nemesis of the game. And I remember, one night I just had this wild idea, I'm going to check in this code revision here where after the ants have killed the spider like 4 or 5 times, the spider gets revenge by growing laser beams that can shoot out its eyes and kill all the other ants, really fast. And so I sprung that on Will one day and he just died laughing. That was, but it was so fun. It was very intense development. We completed that in 6 months flat, working just flat out, 100-hour weeks. But never had so much fun programming a game before. That was just awesome.
Was there much study into like ant farms and stuff? Like, what was the process there? Did you have to, or did you kind of know it from like from being a kid or anything?
Certainly. I had some biology and interest in insects from an early age and had some basics, but we actually went out and talked to experts. And one of the consultants kind of on the game was E.O. Wilson of the Blind Watchmaker fame, just talking about social insects. We did have one person who was really said, "Why are you doing ants? Ants are so stupid. Do Sim Bee. Bees are cool, And so we thought about that for a while and said, "Nah, we're going to do ants." But I remember one phase where Will was capturing wolf spiders and studying how their legs moved for a couple of weeks, just trying to get the kinematics correct for the spider animation. So
I'm trying to get him to shoot eye lasers as well.
Well, yeah. Yeah, if you can't have freaking laser beams coming out of your eyes, what good is it?
Well, one thing that was really popular, and I just thought about it at the time, was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and they were really small and running around with giant ants. Did that kind of help the sales?
Yeah, maybe, and then there was that old black and white B science fiction movie, Them, which was monstrous ants taking over the world. So that kind of gave us the idea that, well, the goal of the game is to drive the stupid humans out of their house.
I remember the big ants in it came from the desert as well.
Exactly. Yes, nuclear fallout, of course. Blame that.
So the SimAnt manual is quite iconic and was greatly appreciated by the fans. Can you tell us more about that and how important it was?
Yeah, Michael Browner was our documentation god, and I agree that is possibly the best and most instructional and educational manual I've ever seen for any game and maybe even for non-game software. Just a real work of art. The whole team was the graphic artists, and we had Hailstorm helped us with sound drivers and writing some of the score. But Michael just knocked it out of the park with his manual. And I agree. I think that belongs in the Hall of Fame of manuals.
Well, Sim Life was another great title. And how did you get involved with the project? And like, what were the initial aims of it?
Yeah, that was an interesting project. After coming off of SimAnt, we were approached by a gentleman who worked for Apple at the time as a ASIC designer, and he had been doing. He was a proponent of simulating chips and software before he actually went to chip fab. And so had gotten really into simulations, but he had this wild idea about I want to do this genetic algorithm, and approached Maxis with the idea. And they said, well, that's great, Ken, but you don't have any experience writing games. We're going to pair you up with Justin here. And so Ken... had kind of a vision of what he wanted to do in terms of building the genetic algorithms and the food webs and the kind of how the game would work, but didn't have really the understanding of how to make it game-like and add the UI and the sounds and things like that to make it more engaging. But nonetheless, it was... I consider that kind of a breakthrough in terms of the first home version of something that shows how genetic algorithms work. that you could actually produce evolution on your computer. You were able to actually prove certain things that you can see in real life in terms of like, well, if you start out with a population that has two sexes, they will eventually come to a 50-50 balance of males to females. There's an ecological pressure, genetic advantages to having that balance. And that was something that you could demonstrate in, like an hour on your computer. It also had possibly the most complicated UI I've ever seen on any game. There's, one screen for the genetics where it was like 100 different sliders, and check boxes and things. So it was a bit overwhelming, I think, for most people. I'm not sure it really was appreciated how cool what that thing was actually doing, but it was a full ecological simulation plus a genetic simulation.
I was going to say sim life, sometimes I think about it, it could be a little bit ahead of its time and kind of seems like a little bit of an early precursor to games like Spore. Do you think it influenced that kind of genre of games?
I think it did to some degree. Spore was kind of a long-term vision that Will had as sort of his magnum opus of being kind of the ultimate end point of the God, mode of simulation games where you're creating a universe and master of all things, all planets and life. It went through many, many, many years of kind of modular development where, let's work on a gravitational model for accreting solar systems, and, that eventually all these separate modules were kind of assembled together into what would become Spore.
Edutainment and kind of digital encyclopedias were quite a trend at the time. Was this game meant to be like a huge crossover between edutainment, serious gaming?
I don't know about how serious it was supposed to be, or I think it was just intended to be, once again, that powers of 10 kind of thing, zooming out to the ultimate viewpoint and tying in lots of different scientific and cosmological principles and evolutionary principles. So certainly an educational component to it. But, I'd say SimAnt kind of did more of, having in-game education as well as a terrific manual and really doing an accurate simulation of social, animal behavior.
And being a kind of simulation of Darwinian evolution, did you worry that people, like maybe religious groups, might oppose it?
That wasn't really ever an issue. I maybe it was just too early, or those people didn't play games and weren't even aware of that games like that existed. I do remember getting one letter from a person who had played SimAnt who was so disturbed by one of the things in the game that he wasn't able to look at it, even though he liked the game, enjoyed the game. But he couldn't even bring himself to write what it was. And so my only guess was it was the caterpillar, because it wasn't the spider. He was okay with the spider and he was okay with the ants. So there wasn't much left, but,
pretty hardcore. A letter complaining about something that you can't even write about because you're so
so angry and upset.
Yeah, I felt sorry for him because he so genuinely loved the game, but at the same time was horrified by this one thing. And but he, I appreciated his input. We did also receive one of the funny things when back then you had registration cards for your software, and you would write in your name, and I don't know why you would register your game, but people did. And one day we got a card from Orson Scott Card, the author of Ender's Game. And we posted it up on the bulletin board. Look, it's Orson Scott's card.
That's brilliant. So what were Maxis's plans with SimCity 2000?
Yeah, SimCity 2000 was sales were kind of flagging, and a lot of these spin-offs were not doing all that well on their own. So SimCity 2000 was envisioned as a reboot of the genre, kind of, and to really explore some of the concepts we had in more depth and just really up the game level a lot. My contribution to SimCity 2000 was on the music. I did all of the arrangement and sound driver programming and things like that for creating all the music on that game. At that point, teams had grown considerably, so we had a huge cast of people working on SimCity 2000.
And the music was beautiful as well. I'll just say, like, SimCity 2000 was a point where everybody kind of had upgraded by then, so they were able to play this new music and also use the new kind of graphic settings.
Absolutely. Things had matured, both in terms of composition and, kind of influences from MIDI, so that you could really, really do some quite beautiful music. And the sound quality had improved drastically. So it was quite enjoyable tweaking things. I would constantly go back and say, I need a better horn sample. This does not sound right to me, and things like that. But it worked out really well.
The game was a step up in kind of every aspect. Which part of the game did you really enjoy, like the new features?
I think the thing that struck me most about was more of the city planning aspect, where you really felt more like a city planner or mayor, and you were balancing so many things in terms of keeping people happy, and do you fund the police, do you fund the fire department, and what happens if you don't? So really exploring kind of that social contract, I thought was interesting. You could easily make a dystopia without trying, very hard.
One of my favorite aspects of SimCity 2000, and a lot of my friends, was the disasters. Who picked them, and was there much time wasted in the office playing around with them?
Yeah, definitely. Certainly that was kind of a callback to the horror movies and science fiction movies of the past. And in fact, Tato sued us because they said having large dinosaur-like animals that could, wreck cities was a trademark and patent infringement or something on their intellectual property with Godzilla. And so we had to make some changes to avoid that and pay them money, basically.
But, I did not know that.
Great feature as well, because you just get bored and you go, right, turn all the disasters on. Let's try.
Exactly.
SimCity 2000 has pretty much become the blueprint for city builders, even to nowadays. Are you guys still blown away by the success of it?
We were, and what really surprised us was that we, ended up having a whole spinoff of Maxis that was Maxis Business Development, because we would have people from government, from real city planners come and say, "Hey, could you help us with like an ecological simulation? Could you help us with solving these real problems in our urban landscapes?" And so that was what kind of blew me away, was that it had actual real world people saying, this is, we don't have tools like this in in the real world. Can't you help us out?
Was it a big task to improve like the AI inside the game and add features like the newspapers and the mayor's news and stuff?
I think at that point, I wouldn't say it was hard. It was more of divide and conquer. So like the newspaper became just like a pet project for one developer, getting the spinning animation and the headline generator and things like that. So it was a lot of little elements, little components that were all came together to make it such a immersive experience.
How do you feel about the legacy of SimCity? Because, over this time now, finally, kind of other players have entered the space. So City Skylines seems to be a really good game. Are you keeping an eye on these city builders and still playing along?
I haven't actually. I when I got out of gaming, game programming, and went back into more corporate stuff, I didn't keep up with like the competition of games. Really, what I got more interested in was social media at that point. I saw that as being the future. I'd been actually working as a part-time guide on America Online, later AOL, just to find out what were people doing online when all they had was chat. What was so addictive about it? What games did people make up when they didn't have anything but words on a screen? So kind of a callback to the text-based adventure games almost. But that was what fascinated me was the early days of what would later become social media.
And you mentioned you were involved with The Sims. What was that like to work on? And just the response to that game, it really kind of changed the world, didn't it?
Yes, I think that everybody underestimated how cool that would be. The early ideas actually weren't centered so much around the Sims, the avatars. It was actually our first concepts were more that it was about architecture. It was building, cool houses. And, we had this really complicated model where you had to buy each nail and, pick all these things. And
tape measure.
Yeah, budget stuff. And so we had all this, really complicated terrain editing and landscaping and it was so involved. Just how do you do a bay window here? What about curved walls? And it just overwhelming number of things if we wanted to go that route. And we quickly realized though that the star of the game was going to be the avatars, not the architecture. Although there are people who like the building aspect of the game more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, that's my wife. She plays The Sims all the time, and she just builds houses and doesn't actually play it. But she plays it all the time, if that makes sense. Just building houses. So how did Maxis change after the success of The Sims?
I could see that the industry was changing, especially with the rise of electronic arts. When I first started, electronic arts was kind of everybody's iconic breakout game company. They just did such a great job with things like Pinball Construction Set and Deluxe Paint and things like that on the Amiga. And they held out this promise of, games that are artwork, games that are important, games that are respectable. A lot of us bought into that and drank that Kool-Aid and said, wow, that's where I want to be. But, as we got into the mid 90s, things started to change in the game landscape, and we started seeing much more corporate kind of, churn models where, Electronic Arts kind of invented this idea of you have a 25-person team and you release in 6 months. And it doesn't matter whether, the game's finished or not, you release in 6 months. And, and that kind of led to the Joe Madden football type of, scenario where every year you get another version of Joe Madden football, and yeah, that's cool. It makes the bean counters happy because you have a predictable revenue stream. But, you're losing some of the soul, I think, of the creative element there. And it became a lot less fun as a game developer. You felt more like you're on a death march with a team of 25 people. So the merger with Maxis and Electronic Arts, or, really Electronic Arts buying Maxis, that kind of, I could see the writing on the wall that, things were going much more down that corporate, route. And I think Will felt the same way to some degree that, well, okay, yeah, it's, time to do something a little bit different.
Well, if you had the choice of picking like just a random sim game, what would you like to see? My personal one would be SimCat, where you go around the local area and follow the trails and fight for territory.
I love that idea, actually. I think Sim Raccoon might be another title.
I love that. Sim Raccoon.
But, honestly, The Sims Online was really, that was the game I enjoyed playing the most, because it combined my interest that I had in social media in terms of, real social interaction, which allowed people to make up their own games within this virtual world, and combined all the elements of SimCity and Sim Life and the Sims that we had loved. It's just now you had more people to share your experience with and bounce ideas off of.
And our final question is, what are you up to nowadays?
Well, nowadays I am actually taking game theory and gamification to the healthcare market. So trying to encourage people to make healthy behavioral changes and manage their chronic conditions by using kind of gamification rewards and advanced, data analytics and lots of tools to use machine learning and things like that to predict what types of rewards are going to encourage people to make a positive change, and doing, reinforcement and engagement strategies. So that's been my focus for the last many years now.
It's good. We need more kind of focus on gaming and mental health, and I think a lot of people at the moment are using gaming as a kind of escape with what's going on in the world. So great to hear that you're kind of involved in that area. Thank you so much for joining us, Justin. That was a really fantastic interview. We had a great time.
I did too. Tremendous fun talking to you guys, and much success with your podcast. I really appreciate it.